Hey everyone, it's Brian here from the Commodore 64 Appreciation Society. You know, few games take me back to a specific time and place quite like Winter Games. It always came out when my friends were over. We'd huddle around my 64, passing the joystick back and forth, chasing gold medals, our anthems, chosen very carefully, and most importantly, a spot on the world records board. And those world records were tough to get. Winter Games wasn't about button mashing. It was about timing and precision, and trying to hold it together while two of your buddies watched you line up that final shot in Biathlon. Playing today still feels great, and that's not just nostalgia talking. Each sport is delivered in short, bite-sized chunks. They're fun to play, they're beautiful to watch, and beating a friend still feels earned. And that's why, more than 40 years later, Winter Games still holds up. Enjoy the video. Faster, higher, stronger. Since 1924, winter athletes have gathered every 4 years to chase gold on ice and snow. These cold-loving athletes are fast, precise, and some would say completely bonkers. They barrel down treacherous mountainsides, race across sheets of ice at terrifying speeds, and defy gravity itself while soaring through the air on a pair of skis. It's an exhilarating spectacle, and by the mid-80s, Epyx already knew that Olympic-style competition worked beautifully on the Commodore 64, so they set out to bring that energy into the winter. The result was Winter Games, 7 events tuned for precision, competition, and a room full of friends. This is its story. So strap on your skis, lace up your skates, and try not to fall out of the bobsled as we examine this wintry Commodore 64 classic. By 1985, Epyx was already one of the premier development studios on the Commodore 64. Founded in 1978 as Automated Simulations, the company quickly built a reputation with early hits like Temple of Apshai and later action standouts like Jumpman and Impossible Mission. Sales were strong, and by the early 80s, the company was ready to expand its reach. Enter executive Michael Katz. He was brought on as CEO in 1983, and under his leadership, Epyx began shifting toward more accessible mass-market titles, particularly sports and action-oriented games. They also made acquisitions, one of which was a development group called Starpath, who just happened to be working on a half-finished Olympic-style game. The timing couldn't have been better. The 1984 Summer Games were set to take place in Los Angeles, and Olympic fever was running high. Atari held the official Olympic license, so Epyx couldn't use formal branding. Instead, they leaned heavily into the atmosphere, ceremonies, anthems, and a full slate of iconic events. The result was Summer Games. Unlike arcade hits such as Hyper Olympic, Summer Games wasn't designed to devour quarters. It was built for the living room. Without the pressure of coin drops, Epyx could focus on precision, practice, and skill, mechanics that rewarded repetition instead of raw speed. The gamble paid off. Summer Games became a best-selling phenomenon and immediately set a new standard for home Olympic-style competition. A sequel, Summer Games 2, quickly followed, refining the formula and expanding the event list. By this point, Epyx understood something very important. Multiplayer competition worked. Precision-based mechanics kept people coming back, and their attention to detail kept them at the top. As the next step, adding winter sports wasn't just logical, it was inevitable. But internally, not everyone was eager to dive back in. The development team was fatigued after the intense push behind the Summer Games titles, and enthusiasm for another massive multi-event project was limited. Sales and marketing, however, had plenty of enthusiasm. They knew a new entry would succeed, and they pushed to keep the momentum going. Development of Winter Games was ultimately outsourced to a studio called Action Graphics. Epyx remained closely involved, reviewing builds, testing gameplay, and maintaining creative control to ensure the final product met their standards. This was also the sign of something larger. While much of the early 80s game industry was still driven by bedroom coders and small independent teams, Epyx was already operating like a modern studio. Structured teams, production schedules, quality assurance pipelines, and yeah, committees and spreadsheets. And at that time, that professionalism mattered. Seeing the Epyx logo on a box signified credibility and quality. You might not have known the individual programmers, but you knew the game would likely be polished, ambitious, and absolutely worth your time. Winter Games shipped in October 1985, and like its summer predecessors, it was a huge commercial success. It quickly climbed the sales charts, and by 1987, it had become Epyx's best-selling title to date. The formula continued with World Games and California Games, both strong entries that cemented the franchise as one of the era's most consistent families of sports titles. In 1988, Epyx returned with the Games, officially licensed titles for both the Summer and Winter Olympics. The timing coincided with the 1988 Games in Seoul and Calgary, but the market had changed. Reviews were lukewarm and the impact wasn't the same. By then, 16-bit machines were rising and Commodore 64 owners could see the writing on the wall. At the same time, Epyx had made a massive investment in developing a powerful handheld system, but funding ran dry and they sold the rights to Atari, who turned it into the Atari Lynx. The financial strain was too much. Epyx declared bankruptcy in 1989 and its remaining assets were sold off in the early 90s. But in 1985, none of that was visible. In 1985, Epyx was at the top of its game, and Winter Games was proof. At its core, Winter Games is a collection of 7 sports mini-games wrapped in a slick Olympic framework. And that framework, first perfected in Summer Games, is key to the experience. You aren't just playing a few different games here, you're competing in the Olympics. The opening ceremonies matter, world records matter, and your nationality matters. In fact, choosing a nationality became like a mini-game in itself. After the doves fly in the opening ceremony, the first step before competing is to select your country. And rarely would we choose our own, way too obvious. Instead, country selection became a flex. Are we setting up heated rivalries with the Soviet Union? It was the Cold War after all. Or maybe it was a battle of the anthems. We all had our favorites and they always sounded so good after beating your buddies, with the volume cranked of course. Or sometimes it was about just making a statement by going completely off the board. We're looking at you, Epyx. With countries selected, the real games could begin. There are of course choices for practicing or competing in a single event, but we always had the most fun playing the complete circuit. The first event is the hot dog aerials, which was a demonstration sport at the 88 Games in Calgary, where Winter Games is actually set. Each player gets 3 attempts to show off their athletic artistry as they soar through the air with a series of moves, trying not to eat it at the bottom. Points are awarded based on the stunts you select, and whether you can cleanly link 2 of them together. Pulling together a swan and daffy as you gracefully fall towards a landing looks amazing, but probably won't win you a medal. If you want a 10, you have to link 2 moves that include a flip. Good job, Lars. Hot dog aerials is the perfect sport to start Winter Games. It's quick, stylish arcade action that looks and sounds amazing. Who doesn't love skiing through beautiful Nordic wilderness with a .22 caliber rifle strapped to your back? That's the Biathlon, and to many, including myself, it's the signature event in Winter Games. Just like the real sport, the game blends endurance, speed, and precision, and messing up on any of those usually means missing out on a gold medal. The flat and downhill sections demand smooth, quick movements to maintain speed. But all of that gets thrown out of the window for the uphills, where success means reefing your joystick back and forth as quickly as possible, raising your heart rate in the game as well as in real life. And that matters because next up is target shooting. Load, aim, fire. Each miss costs you 5 seconds of time, and with 20 targets in total, those penalties add up fast. And remember your heart rate? It matters. The higher it is, the faster those crosshairs move. You can wait a moment or two for it to slow down, but that costs precious time as well. Biathlon is a brilliant event. Gorgeous, varied, and mechanically tight. And victories? Well, there's no luck involved here. They are earned. This is speed skating, a 250-meter head-to-head sprint on a sheet of perfect ice. 2 skaters and about 30 seconds of controlled panic. But unlike classic button mashers like Hyper Olympic, this race isn't about flailing faster than the other guy. It's about rhythm. To build speed, you have to match your joystick movements to your skater's stride. Left, right, keeping the cadence smooth and steady as you accelerate. Break that rhythm and your skater stalls. And in a race this short, that usually means defeat. It's simple, brutally competitive, and over almost as quickly as it begins. Up next is everyone's favorite. Okay, so the 2 figure skating events in Winter Games rarely find themselves on top 10 lists, but they are fun in their own right and a lot deeper and more challenging than most of us remember. First up is the short program. This is a 1-minute program with 7 compulsory elements. Getting a good score requires hitting all 7 movements without falling or making awkward transitions, and the transitions are all about timing. Your spin should be exactly 6 rotations, and jumping should be triggered when your skater's legs are in open stride. And a couple events later is free skating, the 2-minute long program. This works the exact same, but the judges are looking for 3 successful elements for each of the moves. I had no idea about any of this as a kid. I must have, lost my manual. Seriously though. We played the figure skating events because we had to. We would try to make as many jumps as we could and hope the judges were kind. But looking at it now, these 2 events are clearly the most technically challenging in the entire game. Nailed it. Ski jumping is our next sport, and it's a true winter classic. It's fast, stylish, athletic, and truly insane. And like the other events, Winter Games nails it. Your skier starts at the top of the jump tower, presumably shaking with fear. A click of the joystick button sends them on their way down the ramp, and then another click, as close to the end as possible, sends them airborne. And then the real game starts. While in the air, you're going for maximum distance by maintaining an aerodynamic posture. Flailing around and crossing up stances costs you precious meters. But that's not all. Those mistakes also cost you style points, which are multiplied with your distance for the final score. And of course, while all this is happening, you still have to land it, and that comes quickly. A little too quickly in many cases. The final event is Bobsled, and it's another crazy one. This time, it's all about how fast multiple grown men can barrel down a tube of ice at horrifying speeds. At its core, Bobsled operates like a racing game, not all that unlike pit stop or pole position. Your goal is to take the most efficient path through the course, which generally means staying as close to the middle of the track as possible. The turns are everything. You need to steer hard to counter the centrifugal forces. Riding too high will slow you down, resulting in precious lost milliseconds. Worse though, anticipate a turn incorrectly and you're likely to capsize entirely. Oh, the shame. With its fast-paced racing action and razor-thin margins for victory, Bobsled feels like the perfect ending for Winter Games. Once over, players can rest their joysticks and prepare for the closing ceremonies. The music builds, results are displayed, and the overall winner can claim their place at the top of the podium. Good job, Lars. More importantly, they claim bragging rights. At least until next game. I've said this a couple times already, but it bears repeating. Winter Games was a slick production. By 1985, Epyx was already one of the most polished studios on the 64, and they somehow raised the bar again. The visuals are outstanding. Large, fluidly animated sprites make each event feel distinct, and the backdrops sell the setting. From the alpine slopes of hot dog and ski jump, to the quiet Nordic wilderness of the biathlon, to the flags and packed arenas of figure skating, Winter Games presented its sports with a level of polish and authenticity that was rare for the time. And the audio matches it step for step. Each event has its own soundscape. Hot Dog Aerials blends energetic synth with the crisp sound of skis on snow. Ski jumping opens with tense cinematic music before giving way to rushing wind and the thud or crunch of a landing. Biathlon goes minimalist, flowing water, a pounding heartbeat, and the sharp crack of rifle shots. And then there's the ceremony music. The national anthems made victories feel personal. The swelling theme during closing ceremonies make them feel earned. But nothing captures the audiovisual ambition of Winter Games quite like the opening ceremonies. The music begins, a runner enters a packed stadium, the torch is lit. Flames erupt in color as doves soar overhead. It's grand, it's theatrical, and to kids in the 80s, it felt remarkably close to the real thing. On a 1 megahertz machine with 16 colors. The Commodore 64 Appreciation Society absolutely adores Winter Games, and we're definitely not alone. On its release in 1985, Zap64 awarded it 94%, calling it an instant classic and praising its photographic backdrops, stunning sound, and replayability. Commodore User gave it 20 out of 25 stars, calling it a superior sports simulation. Other contemporary magazines echoed the same enthusiasm. And more than 40 years, and 11 Winter Olympics later, that praise still holds up. On Lemon 64, Winter Games currently carries an impressive 8.66, placing it among the top 64 games of all time. It consistently appears on players' lists of all-time favorites. But even at the time, there were hints that the Olympic formula might eventually wear thin. In Zap 64's glowing review, the writers expressed hope for greater variety in future installments. And modern retrospectives sometimes point to its structured, familiar design. And yes, the two very similar figure skating events. Those observations are fair. Winter Games didn't reinvent the wheel, it refined it. It wasn't a scrappy garage experiment, it was a carefully managed production built on a proven formula. And that formula worked. Critics saw the polish, we just kept playing. And the sales numbers proved that there was massive appetite for this kind of competitive, event-based sports gaming. With hindsight, we can see Winter Games, along with World Games and California Games, as part of a turning point. Games were becoming bigger, more polished, and more commercially strategic. Franchises were forming. Licensed sports titles would soon dominate shelves. Titles like Winter Games helped lay that groundwork. But in 1985, none of that mattered to us. We didn't care about market trends or franchise strategy. We cared about landing that ski jump, hitting that final biathlon shot, hearing our anthem, chosen very carefully, echo through the living room. Winter Games may have been built on a proven formula. It may have been carefully managed and commercially strategic, but for a group of teenagers passing a joystick around on a cold winter night, it felt bigger than that. It felt like the Olympics. And more than 40 years later, it still does. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any memories of the game, favorite events, heated rivalries, carefully chosen anthems, I'd love to hear about them. Drop them in the comments. Thanks again for spending some time in the snow with me. Hope to see you again.